And if you've not come across Wag the Dog, then when I tell you the plot, you'll realize what I mean. Wag the Dog starred Dustin Hoffman as a big Hollywood producer and Robert De Niro as the ultimate White House government spinner. And the basic plot was this: they were coming up to an election, and the president had got caught with, it would seem, an underage girl. And so they needed to get that story off the front pages and out of public consciousness. So what they did was decide they were going to start a war against Albania, a war in Albania. And they decided on Albania because they reckoned that very, very few Americans would know where Albania was. And, you do see this phenomenon among quite a lot of Americans, certainly not all, but you can see on the internet where a television crew have gone around asking people with a map of the world where various countries are. And I remember one where the crew had actually put North Korea over Australia. And the person's there, he said, "Oh, I didn't know it was there. Oh, that's interesting." Well, no, it's not there, it's Australia. But this is a really important area, because if we don't get informed even about where countries are, never mind the geopolitical, cultural background, then what's left but just to accept the lies about these countries and these situations from government? Anyway, they decided they were going to hire Dustin Hoffman, the big Hollywood producer, to produce all this, because they weren't actually going to have a war in Albania. They were going to have a war in a studio. And what they were going to do was produce footage which they were then going to give to the networks and the media to then replay to the public as if it was all true. Now, you've only got to look at what's happening today with all these ISIS videos just being regurgitated by the media on the basis that they're true and they reflect what's happening without any serious questioning. I mean, where do these videos come from? These, again, Hollywood kind of type videos, very highly sophisticated, well-made videos. Where do they actually come from? Who's actually behind them? These are the questions we have to ask. Because what happened in Wag the Dog is that they sent this footage to the media, who played it out. The public believed it. And now America's at war with Albania, and it's all in a studio. And there's some interesting dialogue in the film, which kind of is seriously relevant to what's happening today. The Robert De Niro character, was called Breen, the spinner, he said this: "We remember the slogans, we can't even remember the wars. You know why? That's show business. And that, to a very large extent, is what it is. That's why we're here," he said. "Naked girl covered in napalm, V for victory, 5 Marines raising the flag, Mount Suribachi. You remember the picture 50 years from now, but you'll have forgotten the war. The Gulf War, smart bomb falling down a chimney, 2,500 missions a day, 100 days. One video of one bomb," he said, Mr. Motz, the Hoffman character. "The American people bought that war. War is show business. That's why we're here." And there was another quote from Breen, the spinner. He said, "You watch the Gulf War. What do you see day after day? The one smart bomb falling down the chimney. The truth? I was in the building when we shot that shot. We shot it in a studio at Falls Church, Virginia, 1/10 scale model of a building." And the Hoffman character says, "Is that true?" And the reply was, "How the fuck do we know?" You take my point. And the point is, how do we know? We're only just being told. That's what it is. And there's nothing more powerful. I've mentioned this before. There's nothing more powerful in manipulating perception than to show people some pictures and have a voiceover telling them what the pictures mean. If you watch pictures without voiceover, you can see things that you can't see if the voiceover is telling you what you're looking at. Very powerful. In Wag the Dog, not only did they make the war in a studio, they had a Willie Nelson character played by Willie Nelson. He made a war song. They had a what they call photogenic orphan to focus on, focus emotion on. I mean, just look at the wars that have been perpetuated around the world and see this recurring themes that Wag the Dog so brilliantly exposed. And then when it started to die down a bit and the media started to look back at the president and this scandal, and the war appeared to be ending, then they came up with this thing about this guy called Schumann. And Schumann was the story of a guy left behind in Albania. And they had this catch line, discarded like an old shoe. And so they then set up this rescue of Schumann. Am I describing things that have happened in not too distant past? They set up this rescue of Schumann, but Schumann turns out to be the guy they picked turns out to be a right, crazy. And anyway, the plane crashed, and the survivors were helped by a farmer. But this Schumann guy tries to rape the farmer's daughter, and the farmer kills him. So now they've got this hero Schumann being rescued from like behind enemy lines, but he's dead because the farmer killed him. And so what do? They then spin a story to the public that poor old Schumann has died of injuries sustained during the rescue. And they give him this big military funeral. And what happened in the film? The president was re-elected. And when the Hoffman character says, look, I'm not having this, I want some credit for this amazing thing that I've done, he died of a heart attack. And that's why I say Wag the Dog is being remade night after night on the television news, called War Against ISIS and Russia as a Threat to the World. The war on terror is a war on freedom. I've been saying that, writing that for years and years and years, and so have many others in the alternative media. And the horrific events of the last week and more in Tunisia, in France, and parts of the Arabic world are simply the next step to advance the agenda of destroying human freedom and much else besides. And this is not some conspiracy theory pulled out of the ether. It's in documents that you can read and see the connections between. You can go back, for instance, to a document known as a clean break, which was produced for Benjamin Netanyahu in the 1990s by the infamous neocons in the United States, people like Richard Pearl and others. And what it proposed in terms of what Israel should do is mirrored by current events in terms of the countries they should target: Syria, Iraq, Iran, and countries they should try to go into an alliance with in achieving the end of targeting those countries. You can bring it a few years forward to the year 2000, when the same neocons in the United States that were the force behind the Boy Bush administration, they produced a document through a front operation called the Project for the New American Century, calling on the United States to fight multi-theater wars against the same names: Syria, Iraq, Libya, and others, Iran. And just after that, in 2001, in fact, 1 year after that to the month, we had 9/11, the official story of which is shockingly ridiculous and quite obviously a cover story. In the Project for the New American Century document, it said that a new Pearl Harbor would be required to justify these multi-theater wars against these countries in the Middle East and North Africa. And a year later, after this crowd behind that document came to power with the Boy Bush administration, we had 9/11 with its ridiculous official fairy tale. And what has happened as a result of that? The countries targeted in both a clean break and the Project for the New American Century document have been bombed, turned into chaos, and in terms of Iran, constantly threatened and undermined. Then you can go just a very short time, matter of days and weeks after 9/11, and you pick up the story told by General Wesley Clark, a supreme commander for NATO at one point, who said that he went to the Pentagon immediately after 9/11 and was told by a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that the plan was, so this man had been told from on high, in other words, the Secretary of Defense's office, Donald Rumsfeld, that they were going to target and regime change a series of countries in the next few years that followed that. And what were those names? Iraq, Libya, Syria, Iran. The story just is so blatant. And so, to achieve that, they had to find excuses for public consumption only to pick off those countries. So, of course, they went into Afghanistan, first of all, on the basis that bin Laden orchestrated 9/11 from some cave in Afghanistan, and so we must get rid of the Taliban, and we must invade Afghanistan. And then, of course, we had the weapons of mass destruction big lie from Bush and Blair to justify the invasion of Iraq. Tick, from these documents. We had the extraordinary in the sense of it being so blatant, removal of Colonel Gaddafi in Libya on the basis of he's killing his own people, when the people that he was in conflict with were trained, armed, and funded mercenaries, most of them. Funded, armed, and trained by the West. So you create a situation where you create the problem by doing what I've just said in relation to these rebels, and then you offer the solution, which is removing Gaddafi because he's killing his own people when he's just fighting these Western trained, armed, and funded rebels. And then, having ticked that off your list, Gaddafi's gone, you then go on to Syria. And Syria, in terms of the rebels and the people that are behind all that, were largely shipped over from Libya when they'd done the job there. And so you had the attempt to overthrow Assad as quickly as they did Gaddafi. But Assad refuses to budge to this day, as a result of which they have to keep finding excuses to remove him and to help the rebels they control and dictate to remove him. And so there has been an effort to justify Western bombing of Syria. Of course, Obama and the British Prime Minister Cameron tried to do that a few years ago, and they couldn't get it agreed to. Certainly, Cameron couldn't in the Houses of Parliament. And that was an attempt to justify the bombing of Syria on the basis that Assad had used chemical weapons against his own people. It's kind of a mirror of the technique of Gaddafi and that a whole Libyan operation, but it was classic problem, reaction, solution, or in this case, no problem, reaction, solution, because the evidence points to the fact that it was actually members of this rebel group that actually used the chemical weapons. So Assad won't go, and they couldn't justify bombing Syria as a result of this attempted con-trick over chemical weapons. And then ISIS starts to emerge. ISIS being an outgrowth of the whole terrorist movement in the Middle East that really got underway after 9/11, going before, but started to really become more and more prominent after 9/11, with Al-Qaeda and all that, which the evidence shows very clearly was a creation of the Washington administrations. So what do we do now? We need to tick off this latest country on our list, Syria, but he won't go. So we have to do something to get rid of him. And what they want to do, quite clearly, is start bombing Syria. So after this latest series of horrific atrocities, especially from a Western point of view, the killing of nearly 40 people on the beach in Tunisia, we had this announcement this week from the Defence Secretary of Britain. Consider Syria ISIS strikes, Defence Secretary urges MPs. The Defence Secretary has paved the way for airstrikes on Islamic State targets in Syria, saying the extremists needed to be targeted at source. This Defence Secretary is a bloke called Michael Fallon. And the opposition party in Britain, Labour, has indicated it would not oppose military action in Syria as it did in 2013. That's when they tried to do the chemical weapons scam. The party's acting leader, Harriet Harman, said Islamic State had to be stopped and Labour would look very seriously at any proposals brought forward by the government. She said the situation was different from that in 2013, when Labour voted against airstrikes in Syria because IS was a terrorist organisation, while President Assad was the head of a government, albeit a terrible regime. A bit like our own then. And so what's happened here is, instead of directly bombing Syria on the basis of get rid of Assad because of chemical weapons, they've just changed the argument slightly to get support and justification by saying, actually, no, we don't want to bomb Assad, we want to bomb ISIS in Syria, right? Yeah, in Syria, yeah. And of course, the politicians who most of them are not manipulating. Some of them are people in the know, the people who are the designated front men and women for all this. Most of them are just clueless about the world they're actually living in and what's going on all around them. It's extraordinary how high you can go in the political pyramids and the system pyramids until you find someone that actually is in the know of exactly what's going on, or at least some of what's going on. Prime Minister David Cameron later said that ISIS posed an existential threat to the West, and its members in Iraq and Syria were plotting terrible attacks on British soil. And that's another aspect of this whole war on terror, and an aspect, very large aspect, of what happened in Tunisia. And that is to use these appalling attacks to justify more and more deletion of basic freedoms at home, to protect people from the terrorists. It's so simple, and people in such large numbers still can't bloody see it. You create terrorist groups to do terror with this arm or this hand, and then through this hand you use governments and military to respond to the terror, and in doing so take away freedoms at home and justify wars in faraway lands. Well, of course, the horrific events in Paris have dominated the last week and more. From the perspective of what I do and my work, it's been incredibly encouraging to see how so many people, indeed so many more people, are not accepting without question the official version of these terrorist events. They are more and more asking questions to see if the official story adds up and stands up to scrutiny. Because if we don't do that, it means that our perceptions are being manipulated and handed over to us on the basis of people just accepting the official version of everything. We shouldn't forget that it was the same officialdom, the same authorities in the collective sense, that told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to justify that invasion when they weren't. It was the same authority that gave us the most outrageous fairy story in relation to the events of 9/11. And when so many lies and manipulations and fakery has been exposed in all these events before, it would be naivety in the extreme to then expect that when something comes along like Paris, that the authorities are telling you the truth about it. Now, it's too early to start going into great detail about this happened and this is why it was and all that, but you can pick out the themes of events within what happened in Paris and connect it to other events that have actually been revealed with the passage of hindsight, time and research to have been a pack of lies. I mean, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq is a classic. So it's extremely encouraging to see on social media and in other ways, people in much larger numbers are saying, hold on a minute, we're not just accepting this by reflex action. And that is what is necessary if we're actually going to stop being scammed by these terrorist events into giving more and more of our freedoms away, or accepting those freedoms being taken away. Now, people who criticize those who question, my goodness me, has anyone got a mirror? I should have a look if that's what you're doing. They might criticize the conclusions they come to, but asking questions, that's what we should be doing. And those that criticize people for asking questions and not accepting the official version of events, they come out with kind of all-encompassing one-liners like, they say it's all a hoax. Well, some of these things are hoaxes, and some of them are not. There are many different ways to set up something, to set up a problem, which you can then offer the solution to, and change society in the way that you wouldn't have been able to without creating the problem in the first place to justify the change in law and the way that society is run and controlled. So, problem, reaction, solution, the technique that's also been given the name a false flag, when you create a problem covertly and then offer the solutions to the problems you've created. They're not all hoaxes. There are many different ways that this scenario is played out. And to see more and more people grasping, at least to the point of considering the concept, the possibility that those in the shadows are, through those in the public eye, creating problems on purpose with absolutely the goal of changing society as a result of the problem. To grasp that and start to grasp that, another thing we need to consider and start to understand is the scale of absolute bloody evil that is behind all this. Because one of the things is that people judge what others would do by what they would do. And so they say things like, they'd kill all those people on 9/11 just to change society. They'd never do that. No, you wouldn't do that. They do it all the time. And it's this grasping of the scale of evil behind the manipulation of the direction of the world, and this concept of problem, reaction, solution, which that evil uses by doing its evil and then offering a solution to its evil, which leads to more evil. So seeing that more and more grasped, like I say, is really encouraging in terms of where we were not that long ago. And when I started out on this journey 25 years ago, where we basically weren't at all. But like I say, it's not that all these things are hoaxes. There are many different ways that they play problem, reaction, solution, but certainly there are hoaxes, and I mean complete hoaxes. I mean, Sandy Hook, the shootings at the Sandy Hook school was absolutely a hoax. And if you have not come across this, well, just go to my website and put the keyword Sandy Hook in, and you'll get the archive articles, including the work of a man called Wolfgang Halbig. And he is a man who's had a long career in security and safety, including a career looking after the safety and security of schools in the United States. And he started out accepting the official story when it was all breaking in the news, to the point where he actually donated to the fund. But being a professional, being someone who was well aware of how all this works and what's credible and what's not, and what should happen in reacting to these things, because it's his job, he started to realize that not only were the public being told a pack of lies about the shootings and killings at Sandy Hook, but actually there had been no killings. And that is, if you're hearing this for the first time, absolutely shocking. You're mad, mate. What are you talking about? They'd never do that. They did do that. Look into it. And look into Wolfgang's work and what he said and how he's been treated and threatened since he started going public on the fact that this is a nonsense.